Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first ever episode of the Race to Revenue. My name is Kyle Coleman. I'm the SVP of Marketing at Clary, and I am honored to be joined today by Martin Spanik, VP of Revenue Strategy, Operations, and Enablement at Orgvue. Martin, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon.
For those of us who are not familiar with Orgvue, tell us a little bit about the company and then tell us a little bit about your role.
Well, I love this question because essentially what you're asking me, hey, Martin, give me your elevator pitch, right? So sure, let's see. I love looking at this from the perspective of the founder, like where did this actually come from? Mm-hmm. So our founder was, I think, sick and tired and quite frankly, maybe a little bit even embarrassed at times to solve the most important problems of organizations in areas like transformations and M&A using things like Excel and PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Just picture yourself solving large transformation issues, going to the board meeting, and what you do is a screenshot of Excel spreadsheet in a PowerPoint, and I want you to make a multi-million decision at the back of this sort of visual. So, well, fair enough, you can probably use the data, but it's not the most professional, certainly not purpose-built, right?
Yeah.
So he built Orgvue, right? SaaS organization, headquartered here in the UK. That's where I'm dialing in from. Mm-hmm. And we help large and complex businesses streamline things like organizational design, like org design, and workforce planning. And we do this by helping them analyze, design, plan, and monitor their organization so they could make every decision with confidence. So just picture yourself, or pretty much any business at the moment, thinking about, well, what if there's another trade war? What if suddenly there's a war in Western parts of the world? What if I want to acquire a business, or what if I want to expand particular product? Wouldn't it be great to sort of model out the impact of these different scenarios, have them in your back pocket so you could execute when you need to? So that's really what we specialize in.
Wonderful. Okay. And so a lot of parallels between what Orgvue does and what Clary does, and specifically for your role, taking the legacy systems of running revenue out of spreadsheets and moving it into a platform of Clary that is purpose-built to run revenue. Tell us a little bit about kind of life before Clary, or life before a system that was purpose-built to run revenue. What was life like for you working out of spreadsheets?
I think I'll start answering by saying what I'm trying to make my purpose here, or my mission here, is just create an environment where people that are in the revenue generating part of the business are enabled, and the enabled word is very broad, but are enabled to do the best work they can while having fun, right? So that means trying to streamline some processes, enabling them with the technology they need, with the processes they need, with the training they need. And I vividly remember the days before Clary, when we were trying to make our existing CRM in place to do things like time series reporting, tell us where we were last week versus this week, what has changed. That is incredibly painful. And really the easiest way to do that, we'll create a spreadsheet, put a bunch of tabs for every week, and try to capture the commit and best case by different regions, maybe even a product, and then go back and compare. God forbid you actually trying to do a deal level detail and try to do changes on that level. That's virtually impossible. You need that full headcount staff to just do that. So that was one of the reasons why we were thinking Clary could help us solve that problem, and it sure did.
Amazing. Yeah. And the point that you're talking about here, Martin, when you're working out of systems and you lose that visibility, it's a lot of what we're talking about today is visibility across the revenue process. We see that lack of visibility leads to major areas of revenue leak. I'm curious if you can just drill down for us a little bit. Where were one or two areas of revenue leak that you saw in these inefficient processes that didn't have total visibility?
Yeah, so I'll sort of categorize in two different ways. Right? We have the major leaks, right? Missing plumbing, the dam has broken, like really fundamental pieces. Or you could actually say, just going back to basics, maybe some of the basics are missing. Categories or areas that we put in here is, how do you drive urgency in a sales cycle? That's a very fundamental piece. So very common topic that's discussed in our forums, right, is how long does it take from hello to actual meeting, or point of interest or a trigger to some sort of a valuable discovery conversation. Now, I bet there are many people listening right now, may not know the answer. I might be thinking, well, I'm pretty good. Maybe it's a few hours, maybe a day or two. Well, maybe it's 2 weeks. Maybe it's longer than that, because you might be thinking, I'm done from the marketing perspective. Now sales, they got it and they're done, right? They'll wait, it will get rescheduled, things will get missed, and whatnot. So that's a really important piece that we need to sort of shed visibility into. And I think and hopefully everybody on this call will agree, time kills deals. It kills every single deal. And I hate with passion statements like, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Well, guess what? In SaaS, in subscription-based model, when is equally, well, I can't say more, but it's at least equally as important as if, because every day you didn't sign up that customer or didn't partner with you, it's a day of revenue we'll never see again. You cannot recognize it sooner. And hopefully we have a little time, but I'd love to tell one story in here. It's from my previous business. It was a startup in a space that was selling software to help salespeople to sell more, similar to Clary. We had executives and senior leaders join us from a large CRM player, and that allows us to actually pitch our solution to this CRM vendor. And we did. They were already in a sales cycle. Because of the connection, we were allowed to enter the sales cycle late, did a bake-off, got a technical win. Great. So now let's go through the procurement. Going through the procurement, halfway through the quarter, roughly, got everything lined up, which is phenomenal win. Like, we're about to sign this deal. It was Monday morning. They told us we're going to sign by Thursday. Give us a few days. All the signatures will be sorted out. And the sales rep waited until Friday morning to sort of check in. Now, on Friday, they said, look, I'm sorry, the last person just left. Can't really get them. It will be signed first thing on Monday. No problem. Got 7 weeks to go. We got this in the back. And guess what happens? During the weekend, an independent blogger writes an article, the small business stealing executives from this large CRM player. So the next thing is CEO gets an email saying, WTF, link to that article, what's going on? And of course, the deal didn't happen on Monday, right? Weeks of deliberate negotiation back and forth to actually sign it. We did sign it, but not in the quarter. So time kills deals. And it's very important to sort of measure things that can impact velocity.
It's super interesting. And we talk a lot about this concept of revenue governance, which is thinking about revenue as a process that can be broken down into its component parts. And then all of those component parts can be optimized. So in this example that you just gave here, Martin, one of these processes is, what is that SLA for follow-up time? What is that injection of urgency that every rep needs to create inside every single deal? So how do you put that governance in place? What kind of programs have you created to make sure that the things that should be happening are happening and are happening at scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I am a little bit of a data and a research geek. So I do love to sort of, get into data, look for patterns and see something interesting. And I'm a little bit guilty of seeing that interesting pattern and then jumping to action. Okay, I can see win rate has been declining for the last a few quarters. I can narrow it down to a region. Maybe I can narrow it down to some correlation to maybe a competitor being involved. I can present that information, but I need to stop myself and say, well, so what? So win rates are declining. There is a competitor involved, but what are we going to do differently at the back of this finding? And that's really what we need to focus on. So a couple of recent examples that we were looking at is, well, let's figure out our average sales cycle duration. We always measured it. I'm sure every company measures it. But do you measure it by revenue type, by region, by revenue source, or pipeline source, and other elements, and then determine what would be the most likely close date from hello to a signature from that moment in time? And that gives you a little bit more precision. So we introduce new rules that say, well, unless you have a really good reason, like an RFP or a referral that should beat those estimates, then set a date according to your average. Why would you not? But people didn't have that data before. They didn't have the visibility, or they didn't know how to interpret that information. So we're trying to help them with things like that.
Man, okay. So what kinds of, over the years, you've been in this revenue space for many years. What kinds of data do you have access to now? What kinds of information do you have visibility into now that's helping you make these decisions and implement these programs?
Yeah. So there's when you ask me about some of these revenue leaks or some of the revenue challenges, we're looking into data. I'll give you an example in this area. Um, we kept digging into what could be driving our performance improvements, whether it's stopping a win rate decline, which, by the way, by no means is a bad thing. Sometimes you're entering into a new market, there's new competitors.
Sure.
You want your win rate to decline a little bit because that means you're in more deals and you have more opportunities to win. Because win rate is just the percentage; it's not the revenue number, right? So we're looking at what are the key factors that could help us improve win rates. Well, there were two areas that we uncovered. Well, one is better qualification of opportunities, because lost opportunities impact win rate. So we implemented a close loss reviews at a specific sort of threshold and a frequency that we're trying to adhere to. But also we identified, based on looking into sales cycle duration, depending on certain product patterns and product bundles that were being pitched, there was a correlation in sales cycle duration and discounting. So people starting jumping into conclusions, well,
Mhm.
maybe we need a better discounting policy, or maybe we need a better pitch for this bundle. So I decided, well, hold on a second, let's look really at the data. What is the root cause of this problem? And after a thorough analysis and historical performance analysis, interviews with people, we realized, well, our bundling isn't quite aligned to how people want to buy the product. They're looking for a specific set of capabilities to deliver a value. But we were telling them, well, here is a product A that does something else, but it also does what you're looking for. So we're going through an exercise to actually completely repackage that to be more aligned to what customers actually are looking for from day one, to deliver the value they're looking for, and as a result, reduce sales cycle duration and increase value. So these are some of the larger projects that you just cannot do based on a gut feel, because it could be a very expensive like pivot or a move that might backfire.
Really interesting. This point of allowing or enabling buyers to buy the way they want to buy, as opposed to selling the way you want to sell, is really important. And we talk a lot about collaboration, this concept of collaboration, and it takes two forms. One of which is the internal collaboration among your internal revenue teams, but the other is external collaboration between buyer and seller. Super important. So, how do you go about optimizing that kind of buyer seller collaboration? How do you understand the way that buyers want to buy?
Yeah, it's something that's currently very close to my mind, is occupying me quite a lot. Um, as we were looking at the behaviors of deals slipping and best case not turning into revenue, which is a symptom, trying to drill into what could possibly be causing such huge quantities of deals to slip from one quarter to another, or what could cause a giant chunk of deals that were in best case not actually resulting in closing. And it turned out it was a lack of mutually agreed close plans, a
Yeah.
lack of mutually investigated or created account plans and account strategies. And it's a pretty difficult one to introduce to a business. It needs to be something that's part of culture, part of sort of like the DNA of the team. So we're currently really focusing on, well, how do we truly prove that account planning will result in additional revenue? How do we prove to the business that, or to the account executives, mutually agreed close plans do actually allow you to stick to the close days that you set out? Documenting them, making sure they're visible to customer. They actually sign up to those, and you work with them as a project manager with them. So these are the things we're trying to actively introduce, but it's not as simple as saying, hey, from tomorrow, every single deal above 100K needs a close plan, and you need to make it visible in your CRM, right? It needs to be part of the daily forecasts or weekly forecasting routines, your one-to-ones, visibility across the entire business, because product team and finance and customer success are all often involved in account planning and close planning. So we're currently trying to drive that. It's very high priority for us at the moment, based on what we uncovered.
Yeah, that is perfect.
I'm
This
sure you heard similar challenges before.
exactly. I have similar challenges leading enablement here internally. So I hear you. You've mentioned a couple things that I think are pretty interesting, which is the way that you are running revenue and the cadences that you have. You mentioned slip deal reviews. You mentioned weekly forecast calls. You mentioned one-on-ones. What are other kind of key kind of revenue critical meetings or moments that you have throughout the course of a month or quarter?
Yeah, there are a few, but I want to double click on the forecasting piece just for a second, because I think
Please.
in that in itself, there's quite a lot that we can unpack there. And I know forecasting can be a bit of a controversial topic at times because people have different flavors and views, and I think I have a pretty controversial view too. But
Oh,
I think it's working quite well. So let's put it on the table. I hear many companies, and I've seen it here before as well, um, asking their reps to call their worst case.
mm,
Now, my question is, do you really want to be talking about worst case scenario every single week? Right, that's one question that people should really ask. And I understand there's a place for that and time for that. When you're trying to maybe monthly check in, really need a range. What's the worst case scenario? What is still the best case, and get a wider range? But really, the number I'm always focused on is what deals are you committing to close
yes.
this
Yes.
quarter with a close day in this month, right? And also, maybe a little controversial, maybe not. Some people may agree or disagree. Commit deals include your close deals, because I don't want your commit to be dropping throughout a quarter. It's either staying flat or you're increasing it, hopefully. So as you
Mm.
close deals, your commit stays the same because they included in your commit. So I have a nice line throughout the quarter that I can track, and I can see how the commit's been changing. And my best case always includes closed, commit, and best case. So I see a larger line. So my best case is always equal to or greater than commit. So I'm tracking two lines. One sort of stable commit, and best case slowly declining, getting closer and closer to commit. So I know where I'm at and how much fat I have there and what's the likelihood of us actually hitting that best case.
That
And I
is
know
really
people have different views, but I feel pretty strongly about this one.
interesting. I have never heard this before. To continually include close in that call, very interesting. I want to kind of pull us back to the topic of visibility on these forecast calls, because I think a lot of the ways, if you're forecasting out of spreadsheets, or if you're forecasting out of your CRM, you just don't have a ton of fidelity into the deals, into the accounts. And that therefore changes the conversation. The conversation in a forecast call becomes entirely about the numbers. And of course, that's an important part of the forecast call. It's one of the main reasons you're there. However, the visibility into the account, into what has to happen next, into the mutual action plans that you've talked about is key. So that concept of having the path to plan, identifying the opportunities, the accounts that you need to achieve your number seems critical. Do you see that more qualitative conversation happening in these forecast calls, which is less about what we're going to make happen quantitatively and more about how we're going to make it happen from a qualitative perspective?
Absolutely. It's no longer about, hey, you forgot to carry the two, and you forgot to bring in the carryover and all that kind of stuff. That's almost non-existent. But I still need people to say out loud, what is your commit and what is your best case this week, right? That's a commitment. That's an agreement we're making right now on this forecast call. And now let's look at what's actually making up that commit number, that best case number. And also, there are other stages that may still sort of linger in a quarter. Things like omitted, it's invisible, it's not going to show up. Well, guess what? I do have filters that will pull in omitted and pipeline into the view, and I'm going to ask questions. However, it will not be the same question. But the great things are, right, gamification / color coding, good, bad, and indifferent. Green, okay, great, positive change. Red, ooh, something's delayed. We just decreased the forecastability. Blue, right? We just had a recent update. That's good. We, getting people actually keeping things fresh. Now, what we cannot focus on, we noticed that people were using next steps as well, notes or my thoughts, email from customer. These are not next steps, right? Next steps, I know what that means, right? What are you going to do next, and when is it, and who's going to do it? And we're now more and more focusing on these types of questions and conversation rather than did you use the right FX trade? Did you pull in the right deals? So forecast calls are really deals. And I mean, it's no secret. Obviously, we're using Clary to do that, and it allows us to really focus on these types of conversations. So, by the way, thank you for that.
Loved it. Our pleasure, and love to hear it. So we talked about the external collaboration between buyer and seller and the mutual action plans that help to allow for that. And now you're talking about, okay, we're on an internal forecast call. We have our commit for this week, and now we're talking about how we get there. So now we're more on the internal collaboration that helps generate revenue. So who are the people that are involved in this whole collaborative process? It's not just AEs. Who else is involved in making revenue happen?
Yeah. So I love the approach of having a really clear, almost, maybe, I don't know if it's appropriate to use it, almost religious approach to forecasting. It's immovable meaning. It is mandatory. It's persistent. It's always there. And yeah, it's often more important than customer calls. It's in your calendar. It's locked in. Just schedule around it. It's not that difficult, right? There can be exceptions. So we have a Wednesday reminder that everybody has in their calendars from a sales perspective. Here are the 5 things you need to update in your CRM, things like close dates, next steps, stages, and forecast category and whatnot. And on Thursdays, we have regional forecast calls when we have the regional reps and the RVPs and the regional resources supporting the pipeline. That could be customer success, that could be business development, that could be services and services sales, and sometimes in finance, because as we're getting closer to the submitted and procurement stages, sometimes salespeople may miss a detail, like a shipping address or the value is using incorrect currency, and little things like that. They can make sure that that is correct. And then on Fridays, that's the big finale, which is right after this meeting, by the way. So I have to have a hard stop, which is our global forecast call when we look at the RVP's rollout with same teams, but on the leadership level. When we'll look at the overall numbers and people ask same questions as anyone else would. Who can say no to this deal? Do we have a close plan in place? Have we considered the implication on a renewal now that we're coloring this deal to the existing contract? And all these questions can be openly discussed and really focused on the next steps. And in addition to that, we have every Monday morning for about 15 minutes, our revenue ops SEAL team will do a quick check-in and just look at any cases that came in, any quotes that need to be pushed out, any sort of data challenges, so we can just keep the revenue going.
I love to hear this, Martin. And again, like the mistake that a lot of companies make is they think about revenue as just an outcome that happens. Like, okay, yeah, our salespeople are just going to go take care of that. And then at the end of the quarter, good things will happen, we think. But the way that you're talking about it is obviously not that simple. You've mentioned so many different cross-functional stakeholders, all these folks who are revenue critical, from CS to biz dev to marketing to services to getting your finance team pulled in early. It's awesome to hear that you've created this forum for collaboration across the revenue process. It's really wonderful. No surprise that you were awarded Revenue Leader of the Year, FY22. I see the award behind you.
Yeah, thank you. It's right there.
So what's the advice you have for, you obviously work with a lot of very accomplished revenue leaders. What distinguishes you to win the award, and what advice would you give to other people that are looking to follow in your footsteps?
Now, thanks for asking. That's a tough question. But I think I can put it down to one thing, and that is probably my curiosity and my directness with questions and conversation. Always engaging in a dialogue, whether it's a product team challenge, whether it's a services revenue recognition challenge, whether it's a finance related rule around commissions or just overall finance reporting. I always engage, and I just can't help myself. And some of the questions are not very appropriate or even smart, but the fact that I need to ask them, something is probably missing somewhere. Maybe I wasn't enabled or trained, or maybe we actually never discussed it openly. And when I ask, it sort of raises, tide raises all ships, right? Everybody hears the answer and everybody knows for the future. So I do like to engage in an interesting, engaging conversation, sometimes less comfortable and less fun, but always focused on making sure that customers get the value they deserve and the value they want from us. It's always sort of anchored in that. So I like to think that there's some of that in there, and I highly recommend that to everyone.
Wonderful. That curiosity is such a superpower. And if you're willing to wade in to topics or conversations that maybe you don't know that much about, and you're just genuinely curious to understand it, you not only increase your own understanding of a different concept, but exactly what you said, Martin, you can help improve it. You can help identify things that maybe are missing at a fundamental level. So love that. How about more direct feedback, or I'm sorry, direct advice to increase visibility across the revenue process? You've talked a lot about the way that you are leaning on data and leaning on insights and getting your sellers to update CRM and do all those things. Not easy. Most revenue teams are pretty far behind from a maturity standpoint. So for the folks that don't have this level of visibility yet and are maybe struggling to create this sort of environment, what kind of advice would you give to them to get started or improve this visibility across the process?
I'll give you two advices. Sort of my lessons learned. One is typically there's more than one person in meetings with customers. There could be a sales engineer, there could be an implementation engineer, a legal. There's typically someone else in there. Create a place in your CRM or in your tracking system or data system where these people can note their perspective on what's happening and their understanding of the next steps and their perception of the risk to that deal. Because sometimes, the account executives can have optimistic, tunnel vision, happy ears, whatever you want to call it, and may miss some of these details. And a lot of tech companies would have solution consultants, sales engineers on the calls. So create a place for them that they can call home in your CRMs, and they capture the risk, the next steps, the solution summary. And that gives you another flavor or another data that you can look at and compare side by side. And that's something we're actually leveraging and have been for a while. And the other piece is, now I work for a tech company and so do you. But recommendation to people that are buying technology, never expect that it's the tech itself that's going to solve that problem, right? It's never the tech. Once you get past getting the emails in and getting the plumbing and infrastructure in, the technology in itself is not the answer. The question is, what is it that we're trying to improve? Where do we have real leakage and lack of visibility? And then what technology could emphasize or streamline or improve that specific process? Now, you can always or almost always do it without the tech itself, but it's hell of a lot easier when you have something purpose-built that's sort of guiding you down the right path. But just putting tech in, and I do like tech, and I do sometimes buy stuff I may not need, just putting the tech in is not the answer. So think about it before you make that commitment and that decision. What is that you're trying to solve? And figure out how you want to solve it. And tech is likely part of the answer. But there's adoption, right? There is processes around it. There is implementation, all that kind of good stuff. So some of my lessons learned.
Amazing, Martin. And I'll summarize here for a moment. When you identify areas of revenue leak, and every company is experiencing revenue leak across the process, it's inevitable. But the important part is that you identify them and then try and implement processes to stop those areas of revenue leak. And you mentioned two key things, one of which is the collaboration among all these revenue critical employees that are sitting on the calls or involved in the deal in some way. So making sure that there's forums for collaboration, forums for people to input their own thoughts. Love that. And then the second thing you mentioned is governance. Once you identify that a leak exists and there's a process that can create it, how are we going to govern that process to go and solve it? It's not just about putting on a technology Band-Aid and saying, all right, my work here is done. It's about putting on the leadership hat and going and creating a governed process that will allow for you to truly solve the problem at the root cause and then scale from there. So that's all the time we have today, Martin. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Any plugs? Where can people find you? Where can people learn more about Orgvue?
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here. You can absolutely find me on LinkedIn, Martin Spanik. I'll be more than happy to connect. And I already saw a few of you reaching out, so thank you for that. If you would like to learn more about Orgvue, reach out to me directly or have a look at Orgvue, www.orgvue.com. I'm more than happy to engage in a conversation.
Thank you so much, Martin. Enjoy the rest of your day.
And you.
Bye now. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Race to Revenue. Martin, thanks again. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye now.
Thank you.